Hello and welcome. Today we would discuss T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men. I have spoken about the section 1 and section 2 of this poem in an earlier video, and here I would discuss section 3, 4 and 5. And as we know, part 1 and part 2, or section 1 and section 2 of this poem discuss the despair and the so-called hollowness of the present condition, of the modern condition, so to say. So Eliot continues these themes in section 3, 4 and 5 of this poem. Now section 3, let me begin discussing the section 3 now. Section 3 discusses the hopelessness of the existence of the hollow men and the fact that even the surroundings of these hollow men is lifeless. So this poem, the stanza begins, "This is the dead land, this is the cactus land. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star." Now, there are a couple of things that I would like to discuss in this stanza, and I would have to go back and forth, so you'll have to concentrate. Now, first of all, this points to the modern condition, how life is actually pointless. Now, cactus could be symbolic of life that is without hope. Now, cactuses grow on their own and they don't really offer solace to the world, right? But it also suggests that there is life in it, but that life is in a state of limbo, right? It's not a very it doesn't have a very animated presence, so to say. Now, notice that he also equates cactus land and dead land, just like he would have compared hollow men and stuffed men in section 1. Just like these lines, in section 1 he had said we are hollow men, we are stuffed men, right? So similarly, hollow men and stuffed men looked like, as I had discussed, it did feel like it's a contradiction, but in essence it wasn't so, right? Similarly, dead land and cactus land would feel like it's a contradiction, right? A cactus land, a land where cactuses do grow, wouldn't necessarily be dead, right? But it's, in essence, it really is. Just like we are hollow men, we are stuffed men, and these men are stuffed with just values which don't have relevance at all. So similar to that image is the comparison between dead land and cactus land. Now the next line says stone images. It mentions stone images. Now this goes back to Eliot's dilemma, or Eliot's debate that he seems to be making in this video. The idea of the hollow men not being able to have a proper connection with God, right? So stone images here represents the image of false gods, and supplication is to pray to stones or to false gods. So it says supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. Now here the speaker of the hollow men regularly suggests that hollow men have completely lost their contact with God, and that's why they pray to false images or to stone images. And some interpretations suggest that this is an allusion to the story of the Bible, where Israelites had stopped worshipping God instead, and they had started following graven images of false gods, or just images of gods, which was supposed to be not a good thing to do at all. So God punished them for failing to worship God properly. And this reference suggests that hollow men, just like those ancient Israelites, are also similarly incapable of worshipping properly. Now, if we look at the stanza again, you notice that the sentence is very, very long, and it doesn't seem to end. Here the stone images are raised. Here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. Now, either here the word they is meant for stone images that receive supplication. So it says here they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of the fading star. And this is all referring to stone images, is it? Or is the word they being referred to for the hollow men, right? So there is some confusion here, but in any case, it is it is an image of pointlessness, right? The whole idea of supplication to a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star basically means that the hollow man's condition is very hopeless. Now, the star might represent, ideally, a star would represent hope, salvation, and stars are usually associated with heaven. However, just like the cactus-like existence of the hollow men who are in limbo, who live in the dead land or in the cactus land, hope for them is also fading. So they can't really rely on a star of heaven. Their star is also fading in a way. Now the next stanza is it like this in death's other kingdom, walking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness? Lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. Now he says that this stanza could again be this continuing debate on religion. Now he says, is it going to be like this after death as well, in death's other kingdom? And the trembling with tenderness in the next line could be a reference to the yearning of a spiritual connection, which is also unavailable, as I suggested, for the hollow man. Now it could also be a yearning of a cathartic sexual union, which is again unavailable to them, and even if it is available, it lacks any kind of cathartic experience or any pleasure, so to say. So the hollow men are not only without any connection to God, they lack connection with their own emotions. They are without any emotion. Similarly, prayers to broken stone again suggest the worship of false gods. Now, through this image, we see that the death's other kingdom, walking alone at the hour when we are trembling with tenderness, all these images continue with the image of despair, which is continued through part 1, part 2 as well. Now, however ineffective these hollow men are, and however unable to act on their impulses, they nonetheless have a very strong effect on the surroundings, on the world around them. So, and we know that Eliot is quite unhappy with the time. So the speaker describes the landscape as a hollow valley or as a desert with only prickly cactuses which are growing there for vegetation. The prickly pear, the fruit of the cactus plant, is also going to appear in the last part of the poem. Now, the landscape is just as hollow as these men are, meaning that the modern times, which T.S. Eliot is talking about through the poem, are also times of hopelessness and despair, which I've already mentioned in my first video, that this is a post-war poem and it is supposed to express despair. So that despair isn't just within the hollow men, but it actually pervades their surroundings. It is actually a part of the world in which hollow men actually live. Now we reach part 4 or section 4. Now the stanza begins. The eyes are not here, there are no eyes here, in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. Now, again, you see, every line seems to end without even there being a full stop there. So the line doesn't have a full stop, but it is actually a complete line. But even though it is a complete line, the sense of it doesn't get conveyed very well. So as I was saying, that not only through semantics, but also through syntax or the structure, the poet is suggesting disorganization. The disorganization is not just about the meanings that he's conveying, but it is also the structure that he is using. Okay, so the syntax and the semantics of the poem are conveying a sense of disorganization which we see through the poem. Now let me read the first lines of the part 4 again. The eyes are not here, there are no eyes here, in this valley of dying stars, in this hollow valley, this broken jaw of our lost kingdoms. Again, the theme of spiritual emptiness is conveyed in this poem, in this part. The eyes are not here means that the hollow men actually cannot see, perhaps. In the valley of dying stars, he suggests that even the valley, as I was saying, the surroundings are also hollow. The broken jawbone of the lost kingdom would suggest that the only thing left for the hollow men of the erstwhile kingdom of the hollow men could be just a broken jawbone, so to say. So, and for the hollow man, heaven or God's kingdom is also lost, right? So the idea of kingdom would also represent God's kingdom, or the chance to actually reach heaven. Now notice the lines again. As I was saying, all the lines end without the full stop, and this particular poetic device is called end stop line. You know, it stops at the end, even though it doesn't really end through its punctuation. The stanza continues, in the last of meeting places, we grope together and avoid speech, gathered on this beach of the tumid river. Now, the last of the meeting places may mean that the hollow men wait for a final deliverance or an escape. This could even be death. So the hollow men are actually huddled together, but unlike the earlier part of this poem, where they could speak, and when they did speak, they used to speak in dry voices, they just choose not to speak at all. And the tumid river, so now this is completely showing a distrust of speech altogether. They were using speech earlier perhaps in whispers or just in very dry, slow voices. Now they don't speak at all. Now, going to the other line, the tumid river, the tumid actually means swollen. Now the tumid river most likely represents Acheron, or the branch of a mythical river Styx in Greece that the souls must cross into death. And this could also be the reference to Dante. Dante separates Purgatorio with Inferno through a river. So the hollow men are just doomed to wait. They are incapable of either going to paradise or, for that matter, into hell, and they're just waiting in the state of limbo, in a certain purgatory kind of a state where they are neither so evil that they go to hell, but they're also not so nice and wise that they would actually reach heaven. So they are capable of neither. They are not so vicious that they would actually reach hell, but they are not as good, or they do not have enough of a value system that could actually lead them to heaven also. So again, this status of limbo, of being in limbo, which is also expressed in part 3. Sightless, unless the eyes reappear as the perpetual star multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty men. Again, you know, the whole idea of just there being absolute disorganization, you know, is represented through these lines also. Sightless, unless the eyes appear as the perpetual star multifoliate rose. We don't really get a sense of what he is trying to say. It feels like the syntax is really, the words are really disorganized. But let's try to make meaning out of it. Now, again, sightless, meaning the hollow men are just not able to see, they have no vision, and vision here could be a symbol for knowledge or for hope, right? So they do not have vision, they do not have knowledge, they do not have hope, and they do not have hope unless eyes reappear, and this eyes could again be a symbol of hope, right? So unless hope reappears through an external force, right? So the multifoliate rose is a rose which has many petals, and here again Eliot perhaps is referring to Dante. Again, in Dante's Paradiso, the paradise is a flower which is made up of saints, angels, and other examples of goodness and virtue, and so, you know, this dependence on the flower, which will have so many saints or angels, which would help the hollow men to actually rescue themselves. Some interpretations also say that the multifoliate rose could just be a symbol for Virgin Mary, because Virgin Mary is also represented through rose. So the point of these lines is that hollow men are just incapable of saving themselves. If they are to be saved by somebody, it has to be an external force. There is no hope for the, for themselves, for the hollow men to be able to rescue them, except if the heavenly souls come down and restore their vision of truth and goodness. So either a heavenly soul would come, or a saint would come, or Virgin Mary would come to actually save them. Hollow men are absolutely incapable of doing anything to themselves. This is the end of part 4. Now we reach part 5. This is kind of an interesting part, and it is quite musical also. If you see, now it says, here we go round the prickly pear, prickly pear, prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now if you notice, this is actually, now this is written in italics, right? So first thing we notice that it's written differently, while the rest of the poem appears in simple font. Some lines in part 5 actually begin with a heightened sense of, say, disbelief in the world, and some lines are actually written with italics. And the here we go round the prickly pear is actually a parody of children's rhyme. If you remember that these children's rhymes are actually quite popular even today. It's actually supposed to be, here we go round the mulberry bush. It's supposed to be sung like, here we go round the mulberry bush, mulberry bush, mulberry bush. And then the poem actually goes on to say, this is the way we brush our teeth, right? So it actually is supposed to continue, and the children are supposed to be learning something through these poems. And these such poems are actually popular across cultures. Or in North India you have a Hindi translation of this kind of a nursery rhyme also. But what he does is that he gives a kind of a macabre twist to the naive, to the simple, to the very pretty, innocent nursery rhyme, and he changes the mulberry bush to a prickly pear, right? So he says that, it becomes a meaningless activity when you imagine people going around and round the prickly pear. But it could also be symbolic. It's actually symbolic, and of the fact that hollow men do not have values. They do not do things which make any sense, right? They do things which do not have a core meaning. So they simply go around repeating acts that may ultimately be very, very meaningless. And according to one interpretation, Jesus's resurrection happened at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it means that hollow men have no idea about the significance of the time. They keep on repeating their frivolous, meaningless activities again and again, and they're just busy dancing around their cactus even at a pristine, godly time. Let me continue reading part 5. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls a shadow, for thine is the kingdom. Between the conception and the creation, between the emotion and the response, falls a shadow. Life is very long. Now, parts of it are actually very, these are written very, very simply, right? He's making textual references, but these references may not be lost to people who would belong to his culture. So as a speaker describes a shadow which interrupts idea from reality, which interrupts emotion from act. Basically, a shadow is separating the potential for action and the action itself. And for the hollow men, the shadow makes it difficult for them to do anything. And this shadow may represent the fear that the hollow men have, their anxiety, or even death itself. So hollow men are just simply unable to live life to the fullest. They are not able to do anything well. Their ideas cannot convert to reality. Their emotions do not really convert to acts. their conceptions don't really convert to creation, and this continues even in the next lines. Now, but when you look at these lines, for thine is the kingdom, life is very long. Now, these lines are a part of the prayer, but Eliot begins saying these lines, but he does not complete the prayer. So the line is, for thine is the kingdom, which is for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and forever. Amen. This is supposed to be the line. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory. And so he doesn't say the entire line. He just says, for thine in the kingdom, and he doesn't continue with talking about the power and the glory. He doesn't end the poem. Similarly, he says life is very long, and it can just convey the boredom from his life, right? And similarly, the next stanza goes, between the desire and the spasm, between the potency and the existence, between the essence and the descent, falls a shadow. Now this actually goes a step further. Earlier the motion was just interrupted by the shadow. Now the essence of life, the desire, everything is just being corrupted, everything is just being interrupted by this shadow. Now the desire is also being prevented from becoming the spasm. Remember, we have spoken about the lack of sexual satisfaction in part 3 also. So now this too is an allusion to sexual catharsis, and it says it prevents, the desire is being prevented from becoming a spasm of sexual satisfaction. And just like section 3, the sexual gratification does not really happen for hollow men, and here too there's a shadow between desire and the spasm. Similarly, the shadow prevents the hollow man from feeling any kind of higher essence of anything. The desire is separated from the descent into the physical world. And again, the utterance of thine is the kingdom continues, but again, just like the previous line, this is incomplete, right? And when we go on in the coming stanza, for thine is, life is, for thine is the, we see that, this is almost written like an utterance. Somebody is stuttering while they are trying to utter a prayer. So for thine is, life is, for thine is, the final conclusion of the prayer just doesn't come to the hollow man. And the poet wants to actually end the prayer, for thine is the, but he is just unable to complete it. And this attempt at praying is even more unsuccessful in the subsequent times. So the inability to express is conveyed through these poems, and the poet doesn't even describe this kind of hollowness and this misery through words. He's just doing it, he's just demonstrating it through these incomplete utterances, through a person who is just stuttering a prayer, but he's just not able to complete that prayer. And these lines, this poem actually ends, part 5 ends, and this is the end to the poem, and it says, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends, this is the way the world ends. Similar to the nursery rhyme which we began part 5 in, but it ends with, not with a bang, but a whimper. Now these are actually very popular lines, very often quoted. Again, this is a parody, as I was saying. The way the world ends is not a major battle between good and evil as somebody would imagine, and it isn't even a significant event. It's just like the hollow men themselves. The hollow men, as I was saying, these are not evil men, but these are not also great men. These are just people with meaningless life, and the world of the hollow men is also very irrelevant. So this world will also not end with a bang, but with a whimper, which is a feeble, pitiable sound. And the world of the hollow men ends without a final word, without a final either word of a reconciliation or a word of saying goodbye or any any salutation whatsoever. It just ends. It's supposed to be unsung and silent. So this is how the poem ends through these lines, which are very often quoted. Now this was the end of section 3, 4 and 5. Please let me know if you understood the poem, or if you would like some more explanations to this poem. Thank you for requesting this poem. I would be happy to answer any questions. Please write to me.